Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Welcome to another installment of Draven's Classic Modular Reviews, a series where I look over some of the modules, pre-written adventures, and pre-written campaigns that I own in my collection. I've done a couple of these videos already. One was for Keep on the Borderlands, the other was for Dungeon of Death. So one was one of the most iconic, I guess, modules that's ever been released, and the other was the first pre-written adventure that I ever owned. But one of my favorite sources for pre-written adventures, campaigns, and things along those lines was actually Dungeon Magazine. When Paizo Publishing took over publication of Dungeon Magazine, they tried to do things to make it feel a little bit more important. It was initially a bi-monthly release, meaning that it came out once every 2 months, and Paizo ended up bundling it initially with Polyhedron Magazine, which was the RPGA Association monthly or bi-monthly magazine. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail in this particular video because I want to do a separate full video on Dungeon Magazine at some point, hopefully in the near future. But one of the things that Paizo did do to make Dungeon feel a little bit more important was they made it a monthly publication. Now they had some issues to work out where they still had Polyhedron bundled with it at the time. So one of the solutions that they had was to actually split the now 100-page magazine 60-40. So instead of having it like a 50-50 split, they would have it sort of offset each month, so that 1 month Dungeon Magazine would have 60 pages worth of content, Polyhedron would have 40, and then the other month Polyhedron would have 60 and Dungeon would have 40. On the months where Dungeon Magazine had the 40 pages, at least initially, Paizo Publishing dedicated those 40 pages to a single pre-written adventure. And that's one of the things that I want to talk about today. One of my favorite pre-written adventures that appeared in Dungeon, and definitely my favorite one that appeared with the 40-page format, came in the August 2003 issue, issue number 101, and that is Prison of the Firebringer. So this was an adventure set in the Forgotten Realms for characters levels 13 and, or around there I should say. Most Dungeon Magazine adventures had rules for scaling it down for lower levels or scaling it up for higher levels. And the adventure premise revolves around a Slad Lord who was bound and imprisoned centuries ago, prior to the campaign itself, or the 3rd edition or 3.5 version of the Forgotten Realms. The Slad Lord is Bazum Gorog, and he was originally bound by an order of wizards known as the Salskar Order. They bound him, or summoned him in an attempt to defeat an army of trolls that had become a nemesis of the Mage Order. Bazum Gorog was instrumental in driving off the trolls, and rather than freeing him like they was initially promised, the Order ended up continuing to bound him so that they could call upon him at any point in the future if they felt the need. The need did arise, however they didn't have the chance to actually call upon him when the trolls returned in larger numbers, ended up wiping out the Mage Order. For centuries, Bazum Gorog just remained hidden in his prison until it was discovered relatively recently by the time that this adventure was printed and when it was set to take place. The player characters during the course of this adventure will go up against Bazum Gorog's minions, who call themselves the Acolyte of the Hidden Flame. They're an order that's sole purpose is to free their Slad Lord. They have, I think, a Durzagon, which is sort of a fiendish dwarf, as one of their main members, as well as one of their highest ranking members being a Death Slad. The player characters initially discover the Acolytes of the Hidden Flame during a point in time in which they stumble across a caravan that had been raided by this secret cult. The cult is looking for not necessarily items in the caravans themselves for the sake of having the items, but what they need is a way to free Bazum Gorog. Now, they have one of the key components that they need, which is a magical scepter known as the Scepter of the Armagus. However, in order to complete the ritual, what the cult needs is to get 3 mages together, one of which is neutral, another has to be chaotic, and the third has to be lawful. During the ritual, all 3 mages have to incant part of the ritual to complete it, and then at the end, all 3 of them cast Dismissal at the same time in order to free the Slad Lord. At this point, the cult does have, as one of their higher ranking members, the chaotic mage that they need. They did manage to capture a neutral mage and worked out a deal for this neutral mage to be part of the ritual to free Bazumgorog in exchange for his life, and all that they need at this point is a lawful mage. Part of the attacks of on the caravans is not that they expect to find a lawful mage in those caravans, but they think that if they continue to do so, then local governments will begin hiring adventurers who will hopefully have one of the lawful mages that they need to complete this ritual. The player characters end up being one of these adventuring groups. Now the default hook just has them coming across an attack on a caravan, whereas other plot hooks could involve them looking up or being sent specifically to find out what's happening with these caravan attacks. Either way, they come across the Order of the Sacred Flame, or Secret Flame I should say, as they begin their machinations. The player characters then explore the ruins of the Selskar Mage Order's towers, and in that location they end up coming across a Beholder Mage. Not just a typical Beholder, but a Beholder Mage who ended up sacrificing some of his innate magical abilities through his eye stalks to be able to cast spells through them and channel arcane magic through them that way. They have the ability to either completely just confront and face the Beholder Mage, or they can work out a deal where he provides some information on the cult's activities in an attempt to get them driven out. The player characters have the option of considering the deed to be done once they drive off all the remaining members of the cult, include slaying the 3 main members of it. However, if they want to deal with the threat of Bazumgorog once and for all, knowing that if they simply leave him in his prison, it's only going to be a matter of time before he gets more followers, attracts more followers, and gets the 3 mages that he needs to complete the ritual. So the adventurer has the ability and kind of encourages the player characters to go about facing the Slad Lord himself. Bazumgorog is not going to be an easy fight. The player characters could reach up to 15th level by the time they come to encounter him. Most likely they're going to end up being 14th level, however, and he is, in 3rd edition, a challenge rating 21 creature who is a very difficult fight. One of his attacks that he has is 3 times per day when he hits with his weapon. On top of the weapon damage, he can deal just a flat 100 points of fire damage, which can be a very brutal and devastating attack. Not to mention, leading up to Bazumgorog, there's a battle with his cultists, and also a Legendary Hydra that does strength, that has a poisonous bite that drains the strength of anyone bitten by it. If you watch my top 5 gaming stories, or my 5 favorite RPG memories or gaming stories video that I did a while back, you may recognize the Hydra from a story that I did with the campaign or the adventure that I ran. When I ran this particular module or adventure, whatever you want to call it, I had it was only a 3 character campaign at that point, 2 actual player characters and then an NPC cleric that they had made. Leading up to the battle, I did have the cleric memorize Neutralize Poison and Restoration, I think was another one that I had. But those spells ended up being cast out for cure spells because, to quote the players at the time, nobody needs Neutralize Poison. And the player characters did the battle with the Hydra, who was hiding in this this room filled with lava and just some stone platforms that they had to jump across to get to him. And the Paladin, the main fighter character in the party, ended up failing so many fortitude saves that his strength was reduced to, I think it was reduced all the way down to 1, and he was left pinned under the weight of his own equipment. So that's, if you watched that video, this is the adventure that came from, and I ran it straight out of the book. I didn't make any modifications to it. So I actually really loved this adventure. Once I started running 3.5 and I picked this up, I knew I wanted to incorporate this into the campaign that I was running. Mostly because I wanted to have something in between elements of the campaign that drove the overall story forward. I just wanted to have something that was a cool adventure to run in between, and this fit in perfectly. Now it is set in the Forgotten Realms specifically, but you can always end up adapting that pretty easily for a different campaign. I think it defaults to an area between Nesme and Silvery Moon. So it takes place in the Silver Marches, but again, easily adaptable. There's also a lot of really cool potentials for further adventures. Perhaps Bazemgorog, he is a Slad Lord, but there are other Slad Lords out there. So if you wanted to run a campaign centered around confronting the Slad or their Slad Lords, then this is an excellent chapter to include in there. I really enjoyed running it, and again, I like the idea of not only facing the cultists. I never really used Slads before, so to have some blue Slads, green Slads, and even a Death Slad in the adventure was something new for me. As well, the opportunity to face off with the Beholder Mage. Beholders are my favorite monsters, so having Beholder Mage in there, I really just kind of felt the need to want to run the adventure. I think the way that I incorporated it in is the Beholder had something that was required, or something that had a prophecy that would help the player characters with the campaign that was going on at the time, which I'll discuss in a separate one. But again, just the opportunity to face off against this cult and to go up against the Slad Lord is really cool. And one of the things that was great about Dungeon Magazine is that it has several different ways to conclude the adventure if the player characters wanted to. So you don't have to necessarily fight Bazemgorog. That's not something that's a requirement. You can consider the campaign or the adventure completed if the player characters drive off the cultists. If they defeat the three main members in particular, the others will disperse, and it sets the plans back to free Bazemgorog by quite a bit. If you do this, however, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's never going to come back up during the course of the campaign, so it's something that, if the player characters consider it a day at that point, then you could have the player characters fight a newer version of the cult later on, who found out about what the player characters did to disrupt the plans in the first time, and Bazemgorog would have sort of a grudge against them at that point. The player characters could also potentially free Bazemgorog if they wanted to. And this one's kind of if you're running a campaign that's more mercenary, Bazemgorog does promise the player characters treasures, just based off of the other adventurers that have come up against the cult in the past, the items that they've taken off of them, and as well as the gold and things that were offered to Bazemgorog when he was initially bound centuries before as a partial payment towards his services. Overall, like I said, I think this is one of my favorite large adventures that was written for Dungeon Magazine. It was one of the few large adventures that I got to run from it. It wasn't the first adventure that I ran at a dungeon, but it was definitely the first of this scope that I ran. And again, I think it's just an absolutely awesome story. If you have the ability to track it down somewhere, or if it's available online for viewing, I'd recommend reading through it, because it is a really cool adventure. Was real well written, and again, just one of my all-time favorite Dungeon Magazine adventures. Anyway, if any of you have actually played through or run this adventure, let me know about it in the comments below. I'd like to hear some of your stories of things that happened. Like I said, the key moment for me was definitely the fight with the Legendary Hydra, which utilized a template that was introduced in the Monster Manual 2, which was the Creature of Legend. And the poisonous attack was one of the things that was introduced in there. So again, it was just a really cool thing, made for a great story and a great memory of having the Paladin have to sleep in a lava-filled chamber overnight while the other player characters got back spells that would actually make him functional again. So again, thank you very much for taking the time to watch this video. I hope you've enjoyed the series so far, and we'll see you next week for another one. Thank you.